I woke up at 5 in the morning to the sound of metal scraping against asphalt, and my first thought was that someone was stealing my truck. I threw on my boots and coat, not even bothering with a proper shirt under my jacket, and ran outside into the freezing February air. The sun had not even thought about rising yet, and the streetlights cast long shadows across the snow-covered cul-de-sac of Pine Ridge Estates in rural Vermont. What I saw made my blood boil hotter than any coffee could have managed. A tow truck was hauling away my F-350, the same truck I had used just 12 hours earlier to plow every single street in this pretentious little community. I sprinted across my front yard, my breath creating clouds in the bitter cold. "Hey, what the hell are you doing with my truck?" The tow truck driver, a tired-looking guy in his 40s with a scraggly beard, looked at me with sympathy. "Sorry, man, I am just doing my job. Got a call from the HOA about an illegally parked vehicle." "Illegally parked? That is my driveway." He shook his head and pointed to where my truck had been sitting. "Technically, your driveway ends here." He gestured to an invisible line that apparently ran through what I had always considered my property. "Your truck was sticking out about 3 feet past the property line onto the street. HOA says it is a violation of some new parking ordinance." I stared at him in disbelief. My name is Xavier Ortega, and I had lived in Pine Ridge Estates for 3 years. I had bought my modest 2-story house here because the property was affordable, and the location was perfect for my snow removal business. The neighborhood consisted of about 40 homes arranged along a single main road that wound up into the hills, with several smaller streets branching off. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, or at least that was what I thought before the new HOA board took over 6 months ago. "Who called this in?" I demanded, already knowing the answer. The driver pulled out his phone and scrolled through his messages. "Someone named Patricia Moreland. She is the HOA president, I guess. Look, buddy, I really am sorry, but I've got to take this truck to the impound lot. You can sort it out with your HOA and get it back once you pay the towing fee and any fines they have levied. Patricia." Of course, it was Patricia. The woman had made it her personal mission to make my life miserable ever since she got elected as HOA president last August. She was one of those people who thrived on petty power. A 52-year-old woman with an asymmetrical blonde bob that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and a perpetual expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. "How much is this going to cost me?" I asked, resigned. "Towing fee is $250. Storage is $50 a day, plus whatever your HOA fines you, but that is between you and them." I watched helplessly as my truck disappeared down the street, its taillights fading into the pre-dawn darkness. I stood there in the freezing cold, wearing nothing but pajama pants, boots, and a coat, feeling rage build in my chest. That truck was not just my personal vehicle. It was my livelihood. I had 8 commercial clients who depended on me to clear their parking lots after every snowstorm. Plus, I had an informal arrangement with the HOA to plow all the streets in Pine Ridge Estates whenever we got significant snowfall. I went back inside and immediately called Patricia's number. It went straight to voicemail, which was typical. She only answered when she wanted to lecture someone about a rules violation. I left a message anyway, keeping my tone as professional as I could manage. "Patricia, this is Xavier Ortega from 247 Mountain View Drive. Your towing company just took my truck at 5 in the morning. I need to know what ordinance I supposedly violated and how I can get my vehicle back immediately. I have commercial obligations today, and that truck is essential for my business. Call me back as soon as you get this." I hung up and started pacing my living room. Through the window, I could see my neighbor's house across the street. Frank Dennison was a retired schoolteacher who had lived in Pine Ridge Estates since the development first opened 15 years ago. He had warned me about Patricia when she first got elected, saying she had a reputation for being overzealous about rules enforcement. I had laughed it off at the time, figuring I could handle a little bureaucratic nonsense. Now, I was regretting not taking his warnings more seriously. My phone rang at 6:30. I snatched it up, expecting Patricia, but it was my biggest client, the Riverside Shopping Plaza in nearby Montpelier. "Xavier, it is Dennis. We have got about 6 inches of fresh snow here and more coming down. When can you get here?" I closed my eyes and fought the urge to punch the wall. "Dennis, I have got a situation. My truck got towed this morning by my HOA. I am working on getting it back, but it might take a few hours." There was a long pause. "Xavier, I have got stores opening at 9. I need this lot cleared before then. If you cannot do it, I am going to have to call someone else." "I understand. Give me until noon. I promise I will get it sorted out." Another pause. "Noon is the absolute latest. After that, I am making other arrangements." He hung up, and I immediately started trying other numbers. Patricia still was not answering. I called the towing company, but they told me they could not release the vehicle without authorization from the HOA. I called the HOA management company, but their office did not open until 9. I was trapped in bureaucratic limbo while my business crumbled around me. At 7, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I got dressed properly, grabbed my copy of the HOA bylaws that I had been given when I bought the house, and drove my old Jeep Cherokee to Patricia's house. She lived in one of the larger homes on the hill, a sprawling colonial with white columns and a perfectly manicured lawn that was currently buried under snow. Her driveway had been professionally plowed, of course, probably by some company from Montpelier that charged triple what I did. I rang her doorbell 3 times before she finally answered. She opened the door wearing a velour tracksuit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe and looked at me with undisguised irritation. "Xavier, it is 7 in the morning. "You had my truck towed at 5 in the morning, I replied, keeping my voice level. "I need to know what rule I violated and how I can get my vehicle back. I have commercial clients waiting." She crossed her arms, not inviting me inside despite the cold. "Your truck was parked illegally on the street in violation of HOA Ordinance 47B, which was passed at the January board meeting. All vehicles must be parked completely within property boundaries. Your truck was extending approximately 3 feet onto the communal street, which constitutes illegal parking." I pulled out my phone and showed her photos I had taken months ago. "I have parked my truck in that exact spot since I moved in 3 years ago. Nobody has ever said anything about it." "The rule did not exist 3 years ago. It exists now. You were notified by email on January 15th about the new parking ordinances." I scrolled through my phone, finding the email she mentioned. It was buried in a massive document that contained about 40 different new rules, everything from restrictions on holiday decorations to approved paint colors for front doors. The parking ordinance was mentioned in a single line on page 7. "This is ridiculous. I need my truck for work. I am a snow removal contractor." Patricia's expression did not change. "Then you should be more careful about following community rules. Your truck can be released once you pay the towing fee, the impound storage fee, and an HOA fine of $500 for the parking violation." $500 for parking 3 feet over an invisible line. The fine structure is clearly outlined in the new ordinances. You have also accumulated additional fines for other violations. Your holiday lights stayed up until January 8th, which is a week past the mandated removal date. That is another $200. Your garbage cans were visible from the street on 3 separate occasions in December. That is $150 total. And your lawn was not properly maintained before the first snowfall. Another $200. Your total fine amount is $1,050, plus the towing and impound fees. I stared at her in disbelief. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious. The rules apply to everyone, Xavier. Just because you provide a service to the community does not mean you get special treatment. That last comment hit me like a punch to the gut. Speaking of services, who exactly do you think plows the streets in this neighborhood every time it snows? For the first time, Patricia's confidence seemed to waver slightly. We have a contract with Green Mountain Snow Services. No, you do not. You had a contract with them. They dropped you last October because the HOA was consistently late on payments. Frank Dennison asked me if I would take over the plowing on an informal basis. I have been doing it for free, Patricia. Every single snowstorm since November, I have plowed every street in Pine Ridge Estates without charging the HOA a dime because I live here, and I figured it was the neighborly thing to do. Her face flushed slightly, but her expression remained hard. That was your choice. It does not exempt you from following community rules. Fine. You want me to follow the rules. I will follow every single rule, but I am done plowing your streets for free. I turned and walked back to my Jeep, my hands shaking with anger. Behind me, I heard Patricia call out, "You still owe the HOA $1,050 in fines, plus the towing fees." I drove straight to the HOA management company's office in Montpelier, getting there right as they opened at 9. The office was a small suite in a converted house, staffed by 2 people who managed about a dozen different HOA communities in the area. I asked to speak with whoever handled Pine Ridge Estates. A woman in her 30s named Rachel came out to meet me. She looked genuinely sympathetic as I explained the situation. "I have been hearing a lot of complaints about Miss Moreland," she admitted. "She has been very aggressive with enforcement since she became president. But technically, if the rules were properly passed by the board and residents were notified, then the fines are legitimate. Even if they are ridiculous," Rachel shrugged helplessly. "I do not make the rules. I just process the paperwork. Your best option is to appeal the fines at the next board meeting. That is scheduled for February 28th, which is..." She checked her calendar. "Next Wednesday. That is a week away. I need my truck today." "I understand, but there is not much I can do. The towing company will not release the vehicle without either full payment or written authorization from the HOA president." I left the office feeling defeated and called Dennis at the shopping plaza. As expected, he told me he had already hired another company to clear his lot. I then had to make similar calls to my other clients, explaining that I could not fulfill my contracts. 2 of them were understanding and said they would wait a few days. The other 5 said they would find other arrangements. Years of building a reliable reputation were crumbling in a single morning. By the time I got home, it was almost noon. The snow had continued falling, and Pine Ridge Estates was starting to look like a winter wonderland. Our street had about 8 inches on it now, and more was coming. I parked my Jeep in my garage and sat there for a moment, trying to figure out my next move. My phone rang. It was Frank from across the street. "Xavier, did Patricia really have your truck towed?" "Yeah. Apparently, I was parked 3 feet over my property line." Frank swore, which surprised me because he was usually soft-spoken. "That woman is out of control. Half the neighborhood is furious with her. She has been fining people left and right for the most minor things. The Hendersons got fined because their house number was not illuminated brightly enough. The Chens got hit with a violation because their kid's bike was visible in their driveway. It is insane. Well, I hope everyone has a backup plan for snow removal because I am done plowing the streets. There was a long pause. What do you mean? I mean, Patricia made it very clear that doing favors for the neighborhood does not exempt me from her petty rules. So I am not doing any more favors. They want to treat me like just another rule-breaking resident. Fine. They can find someone else to plow the roads. Frank was quiet for a moment. Xavier, I get that you are angry, but we have got a big storm coming. They are predicting another foot of snow over the next 24 hours. The main road up here is steep. If it does not get plowed, people are going to be trapped. Then I guess the HOA better figure out a solution. I have got my own problems to deal with. I spent the rest of the day trying to figure out how to come up with the money for the fines and fees. My business accounts were healthy enough, but I had been planning to use that money for a down payment on a second truck. Shelling out over $1,500 for Patricia's power trip was going to set me back months. I called my bank to see about taking out a small loan, but the process would take days. As evening approached, the snow continued falling. I watched through my window as cars tried to navigate the increasingly treacherous streets. Pine Ridge Estates was built on a hillside, and the main road that connected us to Route 12 had a steep grade in several places. Without proper plowing, it became impassable quickly. At around 6, my doorbell rang. It was Frank, along with 2 other neighbors I knew by sight but had never really talked to. Martin Chen and Susan Henderson. Xavier, we need to talk, Frank said. I let them in, offering coffee that everyone accepted. We sat in my small living room while the snow continued falling outside. Susan spoke first. She was a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and worry lines on her forehead. We heard about what happened with your truck. Patricia has gone too far this time. Way too far, Martin agreed. He was younger than the others, probably in his early 30s, with a tech job that let him work from home. She fined me $300 last month because my holiday wreath had multicolored lights instead of white lights. Apparently, the new rules specify only white lights are allowed. We have been talking to other residents, Frank said. There are at least 20 households who are fed up with Patricia and her rules. We want to call for a vote to remove her as HOA president. I raised my eyebrows. Can you do that? According to the bylaws, yes. If 25% of homeowners sign a petition, we can force a special meeting to vote on removing a board member. There are 40 homes in Pine Ridge Estates, so we need signatures from 10 households. We have already got 8, including the 3 of us. If you sign and we can get 1 more, we can make this happen. I considered it. Part of me wanted to sign immediately, just for the satisfaction of causing Patricia problems. But another part of me was hesitant. Even if you remove her, that does not solve my immediate problem. I still need my truck back and I still owe those fees and fines. Susan leaned forward. What if we took up a collection? Everyone here has benefited from your snow plowing. It is only fair that we help you out. I do not want charity, I said automatically. It is not charity, Martin countered. You have been providing a service that the HOA should be paying for anyway. Consider it back payment for work rendered. I wanted to refuse, but pride was not going to get my truck back. Let me think about it. They left shortly after, and I sat alone in my darkening living room, watching the snow pile up. By 10 that night, it was clear that the storm was as bad as predicted. I checked the weather forecast on my phone and saw that we were now expecting 16 to 20 inches of total accumulation, with the heaviest snow coming overnight. I tried to sleep, but could not. Around midnight, I heard a car struggling on the street outside. I looked out to see someone's sedan spinning its wheels, unable to make it up the hill. The driver eventually gave up and parked at an angle at the side of the road. 30 minutes later, another car had the same problem. By 2 in the morning, there were 5 cars stuck at various points along the street, abandoned by drivers who had given up and walked home. My phone started ringing at 6:30 in the morning. I ignored the first few calls, but eventually checked to see who was trying to reach me. Patricia. I deleted her voicemails without listening to them. She tried 3 more times over the next hour and finally sent a text message. Xavier, we need to discuss the snow removal situation. Please call me immediately. I texted back. I am busy dealing with the fallout from having my business vehicle illegally towed. I suggest you contact Green Mountain Snow Services. Her response came within seconds. They cannot come until tomorrow afternoon at the earliest. We need the streets cleared today. Not my problem. My phone rang again. This time it was Frank. Xavier, the situation is getting bad out here. The mail carrier could not make it up the hill. People cannot get to work. There is a woman on Evergreen Court whose water line burst and she cannot get a plumber up here because the streets are impassable. I felt a twist of guilt in my stomach. Frank, I want to help, but my truck is still impounded. What if we could get your truck back today? How? Give me an hour. I have got an idea. Frank called back 45 minutes later, sounding excited. We took up a collection. We have got $1,800 cash. 16 households contributed. That is enough to cover your towing fees, impound costs, and the fines, with some left over. Get yourself to the towing company and get your truck back. I was speechless. Frank, I cannot accept that much money from you all. It is not a gift, Xavier. We are hiring you. Consider this payment for snow removal services for the rest of the winter. We have already spoken to most of the neighborhood, and there is a general consensus that we want you as our official snow removal contractor, not whoever Patricia tries to hire. The money we collected is your retainer. I felt emotion welling up in my chest. Thank you. I will get my truck and have the streets cleared by this afternoon. One more thing, Frank added. We have got our 10 signatures for the petition. The special meeting is scheduled for this Friday evening. You might want to be there. I drove my Jeep through the terrible road conditions to the impound lot, which took twice as long as it should have. The cash from my neighbors was in an envelope in my coat pocket, and I kept touching it to make sure it was real. When I got to the towing company, the same tired-looking driver from before was there. Hey, it is the HOA guy. You get things sorted out. Yeah, I am here to pay the fees and get my truck back. He looked relieved. Good. That thing has been taking up space in our lot. Let me get the paperwork. The total came to $1,350. I paid in cash, got my keys, and felt an overwhelming sense of relief when I climbed into the cab of my F-350. The truck started immediately, the engine rumbling to life like nothing had happened. I had never been so happy to sit in the driver's seat. I drove straight back to Pine Ridge Estates and got to work. The main road was a mess, with nearly 18 inches of heavy, wet snow covering everything. The abandoned cars from the night before were buried up to their door handles. I started at the bottom of the hill and worked my way up, the truck's plow blade pushing mountains of snow to the sides. It was hard work and took hours, but I fell into the familiar rhythm of it. This was what I was good at. This was what I did. By 3 in the afternoon, I had cleared the main road and was working on the side streets. People came out of their houses to wave and thank me. Several offered me hot coffee or food, which I gratefully accepted during brief breaks. The sense of community was stronger than I had ever felt it before. It was strange how a crisis could bring people together like that. I was just finishing up Evergreen Court when I saw Patricia's silver BMW trying to navigate the freshly plowed road. She pulled up next to me and rolled down her window. Her face was red with anger. "You cannot just take matters into your own hands like this. The HOA has not authorized you to perform snow removal." I leaned out of my truck window, keeping my expression neutral. "I am not working for the HOA. I am working for a group of private citizens who hired me directly to clear the roads in their neighborhood. Last time I checked, there is no rule against that. You still owe the HOA $1,050 in fines." "Actually, I do not. I paid those fines this morning to get my truck back. The towing company required proof of payment before releasing my vehicle. Check with your management company if you do not believe me." She sputtered for a moment, trying to find something to say. "This is not over, Xavier. You think you can just ignore HOA authority, but there are consequences for that kind of attitude." "I am not ignoring anything, Patricia. I am following every rule to the letter. My truck is now parked completely within my property boundaries. My holiday lights came down on time. My garbage cans are stored out of sight. And I am running a legitimate business with private clients who happen to live in this neighborhood. If you have a problem with any of that, feel free to cite the specific ordinance I am violating." She glared at me for a long moment, then rolled up her window and drove off, her BMW fishtailing slightly on the snow despite my plowing efforts. The special meeting was held on Friday evening in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that usually hosted the occasional yard sale or holiday party. I had never been to an HOA meeting before and was not sure what to expect. When I arrived at 7, the parking lot was nearly full, which apparently was unusual. Frank told me that typical board meetings drew maybe 5 or 6 residents. Tonight, there were at least 30 people crammed into the small room. Patricia sat at a table at the front with 2 other board members, a mousy-looking man named Gerald and a woman named Deborah, who always seemed uncomfortable with confrontation. Frank had explained that Gerald always voted however Patricia told him to, while Deborah occasionally tried to be a voice of reason but usually got steamrolled. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. "Before we begin with the petition matter, I want to address the unauthorized snow removal that has been occurring in our community. It has come to my attention that a resident has been operating a commercial business on HOA property without proper authorization." I stood up. "Point of order, Patricia. The streets in Pine Ridge Estates are not HOA property. They are public roads maintained by the town of Plainfield. I checked with the town clerk this morning. The HOA has no legal authority to restrict who can or cannot provide services on public roads." Patricia's face flushed. "That is irrelevant. The issue is that you have been soliciting business from HOA residents." Frank stood up as well. "No, Patricia. We solicited him. 16 households pooled money together to hire Xavier because you failed to arrange proper snow removal services. You let our contract with Green Mountain Snow Services lapse, and when we had a major storm, you had no backup plan. Xavier stepped in and saved us from being trapped in our homes." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Patricia banged her gavel again. "This is not the matter we are here to discuss. We are here to address the petition for my removal as HOA president, which is a frivolous waste of everyone's time." Susan Henderson stood, holding a stack of papers. "The petition has been properly filed according to HOA bylaws. We have signatures from 12 households, which exceeds the required 25% threshold. We are calling for a vote of no confidence based on multiple grievances. including excessive fines for minor violations, failure to maintain essential services, and abuse of authority. What followed was one of the most contentious 2 hours I had ever experienced. Patricia defended every decision she had made, insisting that she was only trying to maintain property values and community standards. Her supporters, which amounted to maybe 5 people, argued that rules needed to be enforced consistently, or they became meaningless, but the majority of residents told a different story. They talked about fines that seemed designed to generate revenue rather than solve problems. They described feeling harassed and unwelcome in their own homes. Martin Chen brought up the fact that Patricia had never once called a meeting to discuss these new ordinances before implementing them. The January board meeting where they had been passed had been held with only Patricia, Gerald, and Deborah present, with no notice given to residents. Rachel from the management company was there to oversee the proceedings, and she confirmed that while technically the board had the authority to pass rules without general resident approval, the usual practice was to allow for comment periods and discussion, especially for major policy changes. The vote was held by secret ballot. When Rachel counted the results, it was not even close. 27 residents voted to remove Patricia from the HOA presidency. 6 voted to keep her. Patricia stood, her face pale with fury. "This is a witch hunt. You are all making a huge mistake. Without proper leadership, this community will fall apart." "We will take our chances," Frank said quietly. Patricia gathered her things and stormed out of the community center. Gerald followed her like a lost puppy, but Deborah remained seated, looking relieved. Rachel addressed the room. "The board now needs to elect a new president. Are there any nominations?" Several people immediately called out Frank's name. He looked surprised but accepted. With Patricia and Gerald gone, there were only vacant seats on the board. The residents quickly nominated and voted in Susan Henderson and Martin Chen to fill those positions. By the end of the night, Pine Ridge Estates had a completely new HOA board. I thought that was the end of the story. Patricia was gone, the streets were being properly maintained, and my business was back on track. I had even managed to win back most of my commercial clients by offering them a discount for the disruption. Life returned to something resembling normal. But Patricia was not the type of person to accept defeat gracefully. 2 weeks after the meeting, I came home to find an official-looking envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a letter from a law firm in Montpelier, informing me that Patricia Moreland was filing a lawsuit against me for defamation, harassment, and tortious interference with HOA governance. She was seeking $50,000 in damages. I called Frank immediately, my hands shaking. "Patricia is suing me." "What? On what grounds?" I read him the letter. Frank swore. "This is ridiculous. She cannot possibly win this." "Maybe not, but defending myself is going to cost money I do not have. Even if I win, I will be out thousands in legal fees." Frank was quiet for a moment. "Let me make some calls." The next morning, I received a call from an attorney named Elizabeth Morris. She explained that Frank and several other residents had contacted her on my behalf, and that she was willing to take my case pro bono. "I have dealt with Patricia Moreland before," she said. "She has a history of filing frivolous lawsuits when she does not get her way. I would be happy to represent you, and I am fairly confident we can get this dismissed quickly." Over the following weeks, Elizabeth did exactly that. She filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that nothing I had done met the legal definition of any of Patricia's claims. I had not defamed her because everything I said at the meeting was either factual or protected opinion. I had not harassed her because I had only interacted with her when necessary to resolve the truck situation. and I had not interfered with HOA governance because the petition to remove her was a legitimate exercise of HOA bylaws. The judge agreed and dismissed the case within a month. He also ordered Patricia to pay my legal fees, which Elizabeth estimated at about $5,000 even for the limited work she had done. Patricia's attorney tried to argue against that, but the judge was not sympathetic. Miss Moreland, this is the third time you have appeared in my courtroom with a lawsuit that lacked merit. I am putting you on notice that if you continue to file frivolous claims, I will consider sanctions. You are ordered to pay Mr. Ortega's legal fees within 30 days. I walked out of the courthouse feeling like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Elizabeth shook my hand and smiled. She will probably try to appeal, but she will lose. You are in the clear, Xavier. Patricia did appeal, and she did lose. By the time summer arrived, she had quietly put her house on the market and moved away. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had relocated to Florida, probably to terrorize some retirement community down there. The new HOA board, led by Frank, took a completely different approach to governance. They held regular meetings where residents were encouraged to participate. They reviewed all of Patricia's new ordinances and repealed about half of them, keeping only the ones that made sense. They formally contracted with me to provide snow removal services for a fair rate, and they made sure all the HOA finances were transparent and properly managed. More importantly, Pine Ridge Estates started to feel like an actual community. People looked out for each other. Block parties became regular events. When the Hendersons had a family emergency and needed help with childcare, neighbors stepped up without hesitation. When Martin Chen's mother came to visit from California, 3 different families invited them over for dinner. I expanded my business, buying that second truck I had been saving for and hiring a part-time employee. My reputation had actually improved after the whole incident with Patricia because word got around about how I had stood up to an abusive HOA and still managed to take care of the neighborhood. I got calls from other communities asking if I would plow for them, and by the following winter, I was running a thriving snow removal operation with steady clients and reliable income. The following February, almost exactly a year after Patricia had my truck towed, we got another major snowstorm. I was out at 4 in the morning, clearing the streets of Pine Ridge Estates while most people were still asleep. As I made my way up the main hill, I saw Frank standing in his driveway with a thermos of coffee and 2 cups. I pulled over and rolled down my window. "You are up early." "Could not sleep with all this snow coming down. Figured you might want some coffee." I climbed out of the truck and accepted a cup. The coffee was hot and strong, exactly what I needed. We stood there in the quiet darkness, watching the snow fall in the glow of the streetlights. "You know, a year ago I was standing in this exact spot watching them tow your truck," Frank said. "I remember thinking that Patricia had finally gone too far and that something needed to change. I am glad we made that change happen." "Me too," I said, "though I could have done without the lawsuit." Frank chuckled. "Patricia always needed to have the last word. I am just glad it actually was the last word and she is someone else's problem now." We finished our coffee in comfortable silence. Then I got back in my truck to continue plowing. By the time the sun came up, every street in Pine Ridge Estates was clear and safe. People could get to work, kids could get to school, and life could continue normally. That was what a community was supposed to be about. Not petty rules and power trips, but people taking care of each other and doing what needed to be done. I never did get a formal apology from Patricia for the truck incident or the lawsuit. I did not really expect one. People like her do not apologize because they never believe they are wrong. But in a way, I got something better. I got to be part of a neighborhood that came together when it mattered, that stood up against bullying and pettiness, and that emerged stronger on the other side. My truck never got parked 3 feet over the property line again, though. I made sure of that. Not because I was afraid of fines or having it towed, but because I had learned an important lesson about reading the fine print and staying on top of rule changes. The new HOA board was reasonable and fair, but rules existed for a reason, and it was easier to follow them than to fight about them. That spring, the neighborhood threw a party to celebrate the 1-year anniversary of the new board taking over. It was held in the community center, the same place where the heated special meeting had occurred. But instead of anger and confrontation, there was laughter and music and plates of potluck food. Kids ran around playing while adults chatted and enjoyed the warm weather. Frank gave a short speech thanking everyone for their participation and support over the past year. He specifically mentioned the challenges they had overcome, including the transition from the previous board, and he acknowledged that none of it would have been possible without residents who were willing to stand up for what was right. Then he surprised me by asking me to come up front. I reluctantly made my way through the crowd, feeling self-conscious. "I want to thank Xavier specifically," Frank said. "A year ago, he was hit with an unjust situation that would have broken a lot of people. Instead of giving up or moving away, he stood his ground and reminded all of us what it means to be a good neighbor. He could have left us to deal with our own snow problems after how he was treated, but he did not. He came back and helped us anyway." That kind of character is what makes a community strong. People applauded, and I felt my face getting red. I was not good with public recognition, but I appreciated the sentiment. Susan Henderson came up and handed me a framed certificate. It was a formal contract between me and the Pine Ridge Estates, HOA, for snow removal services, signed by all the current board members. At the bottom was a handwritten note that said, "Thank you for keeping our roads clear and our community together." I took the certificate home and hung it in my office, right next to my business license and the photos of my trucks. It became one of my most prized possessions, not because of what it represented financially, but because of what it meant personally. I was not just a contractor doing a job. I was a valued member of a community that had fought for me when I needed it. The years that followed were good ones. My business continued to grow, and Pine Ridge Estates continued to thrive under its new leadership. There were still occasional disagreements and issues that came up, as there are in any community, but they were handled with communication and compromise rather than autocratic rule enforcement. I eventually bought a larger house in the neighborhood, one with a bigger garage for my equipment and a workshop where I could do maintenance on my trucks. I started dating someone I met at one of the neighborhood events, a woman named Nicole Zimmerman, who had moved to Pine Ridge Estates about 6 months after the Patricia drama ended. Nicole was a veterinarian who ran a mobile practice, driving around to farms and homes to treat animals. We bonded over both having jobs that required us to be out in all kinds of weather. Nicole had heard the story about my truck being towed from multiple neighbors before I ever had a chance to tell her myself. She thought it was hilarious that an HOA president had been dumb enough to antagonize the one person who kept the streets passable in winter. What did she think was going to happen? Nicole asked one evening as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset. Did she really believe you would just accept being treated like that and continue plowing for free? I think Patricia never really thought about consequences, I said. She was so focused on enforcing rules and maintaining her authority that she did not consider how her actions affected real people. To her, I was just another resident who needed to be kept in line. Well, She learned a hard lesson then. Do not mess with the guy who controls access to the outside world during a Vermont winter. I laughed. I never thought of it that way, but yeah, I guess that is pretty accurate. Nicole and I got married 2 years later in a ceremony held right there in Pine Ridge Estates, with most of the neighborhood in attendance. Frank officiated since he had gotten ordained online specifically for the occasion. It was a small, simple wedding, exactly what we both wanted. When winter came that year, Nicole sometimes rode along with me during snow plowing runs, keeping me company during the early morning hours and bringing thermoses of hot chocolate. Life was not perfect. There were still storms that came at inconvenient times, equipment that broke down, clients who complained about minor issues, and all the regular stresses that come with running a business and maintaining a home. But the foundation was solid. I was part of a community that valued me. I had work that I was good at and enjoyed, and I had people in my life who cared about me. Sometimes I wondered what happened to Patricia. I heard occasional updates through mutual acquaintances. She had apparently tried to get elected to her new HOA board in Florida, but lost badly. Her reputation had followed her, with people in Vermont warning their connections down south about her management style. I heard she eventually gave up on HOA involvement entirely and focused on other pursuits. I did not wish her ill, but I did not particularly care about her well-being either. She was just someone who had briefly made my life difficult and then moved on. The incident with my truck being towed became something of a legend in Pine Ridge Estates. New residents were told the story as a cautionary tale about what happens when HOA boards forget they are supposed to serve the community, not rule over it. Parents used it to teach their kids about standing up for yourself and the importance of community support. It even made its way into regional HOA management discussions as an example of how not to handle resident relations. For me, though, it was just a chapter in my life. An important chapter, certainly, one that taught me valuable lessons about knowing my rights, reading contracts carefully, and the power of community solidarity. But it was not the defining moment of my existence. I was not the guy who got his truck towed by a crazy HOA lady. I was Xavier Ortega, a snow removal contractor who took pride in his work, a homeowner who cared about his neighborhood, and a husband who looked forward to coming home at the end of a long day. The roads in Pine Ridge Estates remained clear every winter, maintained by someone who was properly compensated and appreciated for his work. The HOA operated transparently and fairly, with residents who were engaged and informed about decisions that affected their community. And life went on as it always does, with the small triumphs and challenges that make up an ordinary existence. On cold winter mornings when I was out before dawn pushing snow off the streets, I sometimes thought about that February morning when I woke to the sound of my truck being towed. I remembered the rage and helplessness I felt, standing in the freezing cold watching my livelihood disappear. But I also remembered what came after. The neighbors who rallied around me, the community that stood up against unfair treatment, the new relationships and sense of belonging that grew out of adversity. In a strange way, I was almost grateful for what Patricia had done. Not grateful for the stress or the financial hit or the lawsuit, but grateful for the catalyst it provided. Before that incident, I had been living in Pine Ridge Estates, but not really being part of it. I kept to myself, focused on my work, and did not get involved in neighborhood affairs. The truck situation forced me to engage, to connect with my neighbors, and to become an active participant in the community, rather than just a resident who happened to live there. Frank retired from the HOA board after serving for 3 years. At his farewell party, he pulled me aside for a private conversation. "You know, when I first suggested starting that petition to remove Patricia, I was not sure it would work," he admitted. "I thought maybe we could get the signatures, but I worried that when it came time to actually vote, people would chicken out. There is something intimidating about directly confronting authority, even petty HOA authority." "What changed?" I asked. "You did. When Patricia had your truck towed and you stood up to her, it showed everyone else that she could be challenged. You were not afraid of her threats or her fines. You just calmly stated the facts and refused to back down. That gave other people courage to do the same." I had never thought of it that way. I was not trying to be brave. I was just trying to get my truck back so I could work. Frank smiled. "That is exactly what made it powerful. You were not looking for a fight or trying to make a statement. You just wanted to be treated fairly and do your job." That is something everyone could relate to. The conversation stayed with me. It made me realize that sometimes the most important acts of resistance are not grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes they are just ordinary people refusing to accept unfair treatment and insisting on basic reasonableness. Patricia had counted on people being too intimidated or apathetic to push back against her rules. When I did push back, simply by asserting my rights and continuing to do my work, it created space for others to do the same. Years passed. I grew older, my business matured, and Pine Ridge Estates continued to evolve. Some families moved away, new families moved in, and the neighborhood demographics shifted. But the core values that had emerged from that tumultuous period remained. The HOA continued to operate as a service organization rather than an enforcement agency. Residents stayed engaged and informed. And every winter, the streets were properly maintained by a contractor who was valued and respected. I eventually trained my younger cousin Roberto to take over much of the day-to-day plowing work as I moved towards semi-retirement. He had the same work ethic and attention to detail that had made my business successful, and he quickly earned the trust of our clients. I still went out during major storms because I loved the work, but I no longer felt the pressure of being the only person who could keep the roads clear. Nicole and I talked sometimes about moving to a warmer climate, maybe somewhere we would not have to deal with snow 6 months out of the year. But we never seriously pursued it. Pine Ridge Estates was home. These people were our people. This community, with all its history and personality and quirks, was where we belonged. On the 10th anniversary of the truck towing incident, the neighborhood threw another party. It had become a tradition to celebrate the founding of the new HOA board every February, though by this point, most people had forgotten the specific details of what had happened. For many of the newer residents, it was just a fun winter party that broke up the monotony of the cold months. But those of us who had been there remembered. We remembered the tension and the anger and the fear that the community might fracture permanently. We remembered Patricia's red face as she was voted out. We remembered coming together to support each other in ways that surprised us all. And we remembered the lessons learned about fairness, accountability, and the true meaning of community. I stood in the community center that evening, surrounded by neighbors and friends, holding a cup of terrible punch and listening to kids shriek with laughter in the next room. Nicole was across the hall talking to Susan Henderson about organizing a community garden for the spring. Frank was holding court near the food table, telling exaggerated stories about the old days. Martin Chen was setting up a projector to show photos from the past decade of neighborhood events. This was what mattered. Not the drama or the conflict, but what came after. The relationships built, the trust earned, the sense of belonging that turned a collection of houses into an actual neighborhood. Patricia had tried to create community through rules and enforcement, never understanding that real community comes from mutual support and shared values. My phone buzzed with a weather alert. Another storm was coming, expected to drop 8 to 12 inches starting early tomorrow morning. I smiled and drained my cup of punch. Some things never changed. There would always be another storm, another early morning, another set of streets to clear. But that was okay. It was what I did. It was who I was. And I would not have it any other way. The party wound down around 10. People bundled up and headed home through the cold night, calling out goodbyes and see you soons. Nicole and I walked back to our house hand in hand, our breath creating clouds in the frozen air. The streets were lined with cars parked properly within property boundaries, decorative lights that met HOA guidelines, and houses that looked lived in and loved rather than maintained out of fear of fines. I set my alarm for 4:30, knowing I would need to start plowing by 5 to stay ahead of the storm. Nicole kissed me goodnight and was asleep within minutes, but I lay awake for a while, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. A single act of petty authoritarianism had somehow led to a decade of positive change and personal growth. Patricia Moreland probably never realized the impact she had, or that her attempt to punish me for a minor parking violation had ultimately made Pine Ridge Estates a better place to live. The alarm went off too early, as it always did. I dragged myself out of bed, pulled on my insulated coveralls, and grabbed the travel mug of coffee that Nicole had prepared the night before. The truck was waiting in the garage, plow blade attached and ready to go. I fired up the engine and smiled at the familiar rumble. The streets of Pine Ridge Estates were covered in fresh snow, untouched and pristine in the pre-dawn darkness. I dropped the plow blade and started my route, pushing the snow aside and creating clear paths for my neighbors. This was my purpose. This was my contribution. And as the sun began to rise over the Vermont hills, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, I felt a deep sense of contentment. Life was good. The roads were clear, and I was home.